Hello there! We, the Owl, are a group of people who have strong opinions about a lot of things. Quite recently about the TV adaptation of The Witcher, so we thought we'd make a YouTube video about it. Having had no prior experience, the project turned from let's make a short video to let's make a long one to let's make a series. So here we are with our first part to the fresh news series about how we are of the opinion that there are a bunch of things the Netflix adaptation does better than the source material. Now, let me back up here a bit. We're coming from very different places where the Witcher saga is concerned, ranging from someone knowing neither the games nor the books, yes, shocking, I know, to me, who would proudly call herself a hardcore fan. So, you could say we had all stages of anticipation and expectations present. Surprisingly, we all liked it, loved it, actually. We tried to pinpoint why the series resonated so much with us, even more than the games and considerably more than the books. Now, there are quite a few videos out there describing to the last detail how the show deviates from the source material, and they're very interesting to watch. The viewpoint I find a little underrepresented, though, is not so much the nitty-gritty details of how the facts are represented, but how the show treated what I have always felt were conceptual shortcomings or actual flaws in the books. Flaws that we as fans mostly overlook because, let's be honest here, we just love the games to death and having all that backstory to explore is almost too good to be true, and of course we'd gobble that up and defend it to our last breath. And the books are great, don't get me wrong. They present ideas and concepts rarely explored in fantasy, be it the conjunction of spheres or the magically created super soldiers. They masterfully took well-known myths and fairy tales and cast them in a gritty, dark light while simultaneously veering into the absurd, which created side-splittingly funny situations. They portrayed relationships so profoundly deep and damaged, your heart aches for the protagonists. And last but not least, they created characters so iconic, so memorable, they will stay with us forever. Still, there are problems. Some of them are probably a result of how the books came to be. First, as a one-shot anthology that later, by popular demand, evolved into a 5-book series of novels. Some are surely rooted in the author's own views in the times the books were written. Some in his outright refusal to treat the world he created super seriously, refusing to build it with all the usual trappings of a fantasy world, like a map or a coherent magic system. Some of what I personally see as problems, like the pacing or the verbosity of some characters, are only subjective. Still, I think it intellectually dishonest to criticize the Netflix series for diverging from the books when those divergences, in my opinion, make the series a kinder, better, more modern and more relatable piece of art than the books ever were. In this series I will discuss those divergences and their impact. So, let's dive right into the first major point. Geralt as a protagonist. When discussing book Geralt amongst ourselves over the years, we always refer to him as a Mary Sue, a blatant self-insert character who serves as a stand-in for male wish fulfillment. We never deemed that a bad thing, only a rather obvious one. Indeed, it is one of the reasons Geralt works so well as a character in a video game. He is what everyone wants to be. He is a role you like to slip into because he's just so awesome. If you look into this more closely though, trying to apply the characteristics of a Mary Sue to Geralt, you cannot really make them stick. This is because what female writers invent as a seemingly perfect woman is fundamentally different from the perfect man. Now, I won't reiterate what a female Mary Sue is like, you can look that up almost everywhere. But what about a male one? Geralt, as a character, was created in the early 90s, and the then prevalent male wish fulfillment character, role model and overall perfect man was typically the 80s action movie hero, played by the stars like Ford, Stallone, Schwarzenegger, Willis, and basically the whole cast of The Expendables. What defines the typical 80s action hero? Without exception, they all possess inordinate physical strength and defined muscles. They've often been trained in some noble but undervalued profession like cop or soldier, giving them fighting and weapon-wielding abilities without having to show exactly how those have been acquired. This background conveniently also gives them a fully operational moral compass. They are at all times able to differentiate good from bad. They usually have undergone some extensive sort of physical and/or emotional trauma. They do not have any flaws per se, and those they have are coded as very manly, e.g. they drink too much alcohol, carelessly throw around cuss words, or, I don't know, drive over the speed limit or something. They are notoriously bad at taking care of themselves, often live in a dumpster of an apartment with only beer or moldy pizza in the fridge. Most of those traits are shown as decidedly self-destructive. They are men of few words, but with biting sarcasm and snappy one-liners. Despite all that, some of them are pretty successful with women and live a lifestyle that is not only promiscuous, but also amoral, showing their female conquests as faceless, nameless objects with no impact on their lives, oftentimes only alluding to their existence by a piece of lingerie left in their apartment. They are loners, fiercely self-reliant, and have few, if any, meaningful social connections to family or friends. Women in those sorts of stories, if present at all, are either in the fridge, meaning tragically dead and supposed to be avenged, damsels to be protected and/or saved, pushover sidekicks of varying usefulness, and last but not least, trophies. I wouldn't even call them love interests, because you can't tell me that Stallone's and Bullock's characters in Demolition Man were even close to being in love with one another. They do not show feelings and emotional pain, because they seem either not capable of it, fully in control of them, or simply too jaded and burned out to care. While they still feel physical pain, they deal with this in an admirable fashion, often self-medicating or self-operating in the most horrendously painful way imaginable. If you would read the books, you would notice that Geralt fits most, if not all, of those traits. But having a character be a Mary Sue or an 80s action hero is not in itself a bad thing, or should stop you from enjoying them. As mentioned before, this is part of the reason both the books and the games have been so wildly successful. Still, the typical 80s action heroes have come and gone, and we are nowadays presented with more emotionally capable, relatable, and nuanced male heroes. The reason for this is twofold. One part is that this trope has been done to death, and as role model is just not relevant anymore. Nowadays, we're looking for more balanced, relatable men to be the protagonists to our stories. For another, this hero type has serious storytelling limitations the adaptation of The Witcher had to overcome to tell an interesting story. Let's look at some of them. No character development. These characters are completely static. They don't have flaws and do not need to change. They are fully capable of always making the right calls when it matters. They always do and say the right thing. The plot revolves around them, and they are the very same person at the end of the movies as they were going in. They are presented with difficulties and they triumph over them, they are not changed by them. Or to put it that way, they do not go through the whole hero's journey as Joseph Campbell described it. There is basically no possibility of a meaningful character arc. This is very much true for the books. In the books, Geralt does not have any discernible flaws. Despite his upbringing, his experiences, and his place in society, he retains his morals and his equilibrium, which makes him special even amongst his own Witcher brethren. Does he question himself? Yes, he does. But everything around him remains weirdly static, as if his actions in regards to the people he is emotionally close to cannot have any real consequences. In the book, there was a scene where Geralt got snappy with his friends. However, he was quickly called out on that by a more insightful sidekick, and then promptly reassured that they would help him regardless of how he acted with them. So, there were no real consequences for his actions. Everyone around him quickly forgave him, chalking it up to him just being like this without challenging him at all. The series goes a more nuanced way with that, showing that yes, Geralt has flaws, and he cannot do and say the wrong things with impunity. Take his relationship with Jaskier, for instance. Our favorite bard, with his weird obsession with having people throw money at Geralt, is not only comic relief. We see them developing a somewhat grudging friendship, even though Geralt cannot even bring himself to call Jaskier that.
I'm not your friend.
A friendship that is jeopardized when Geralt of all people throws a hissy fit and vents his pent-up emotions on Jaskier. In the series, the scene with Jaskier brings real emotional pain with it, since Jaskier actually leaves him after that, not willing and, truly not in any way obliged, to continue being Geralt's emotional punching bag. And that's awesome, because it shows Geralt being blatantly wrong, even if understandably so on an emotional level. Even my dad, who hates every minute Jaskier is on screen and kept wishing Geralt would just somehow get rid of him, was astounded at how unfairly Geralt blew up at the one person who was willing and brave enough to put up with him. I cannot wait to see how the show will deal with that conflict, how this particular friendship will come back from that setback and continue to thrive, deepen and mature. While a bit more subtle, we also see Geralt hurting Yennefer with his ill-chosen remark about her being a bad mother. He hadn't meant it the way she took it, but that was something that wouldn't have happened to book Geralt, or if it happened, no one would have taken it amiss. Also, most importantly, the show isn't above showing our beloved hero doing, excuse the language, truly dumb shit. Demanding the child surprise from Duny was a deliberate decision by book Geralt, which conflicted with the characterization we had seen from him up to that point. The series just shows him throwing the proposition at Duny unthinkingly, only for the whole thing to come back and bite him. In the series, we actually see him learning from this, because he doesn't, like in the book, make the same mistake a second time. Same with the staggeringly idiotic decision to cheat Destiny by hunting for a djinn to cure his sleeplessness, while in the book, finding the djinn was just a coincidence. Not only is this clearly framed as a horrendously bad call, we can actually see our beloved hero blatantly deceiving himself. And while I would have liked the first wish to remain as it has been in the book, there is something to be said for Geralt, once again, inadvertently hurting someone close to him by speaking before he thinks. So we are shown that Geralt isn't without flaws, even though they are seamlessly integrated into how his character is presented and thoroughly understandable and relatable from his point of view. We also see him not only recognizing the flaws in his reasoning, but also reflecting on them. This can be best seen in the direct contrast between the Renfri and Ada storylines. They are both princesses to be saved from an evil sorcerer, and you could say that he only saves Ada because he failed to save Renfri. He only kills Ostrid because he failed to punish Stregobor. His flaws do not make him a bad person, they make him a more interesting one. They give him potential to grow. They make his interactions unpredictable, his relationship something he has to learn how to navigate. Passive heroes. Action flick heroes are, despite that they're being called exactly that, for the most part reactive, passive characters. Things happen to them, not because of them. They react to outside circumstances, and if left to their own devices, nothing would happen at all. John Rambo would not have had a thing to do if the evil sheriff hadn't been mean to him. John McClane would not have fought the bad guys if he hadn't been in the very same building by coincidence. We see a lot of that in the books as well. Most of the conflicts that arise in the stories are the results of the actions of other people, while Geralt is often shown as being caught between multiple fronts. This continues even through the saga. Geralt only begs Triss and Yennefer for help when Ciri is in danger. That is also what drives him forward when going after Rience and later Ciri. It is never because he wants to achieve something, it is because he wants to protect the status quo. In a recent AMA on Reddit, Lauren Schmidt-Hisrich addressed this exact point. She said that to her, a more active character is a more interesting one, which is the reason why they gave Geralt a more active role, again with the inbuilt possibility to do the wrong things. And I agree with her. It would have gotten old pretty fast to see Geralt endlessly wrestle with the same moral dilemma. In the games, this was fun because it gave the player the agency to make different choices, to step into Geralt's footsteps and try to live his life, so to speak. But in a more passive medium, like television, you have to give the agency back to the protagonist. In the show, there are two examples where we can see the more active Geralt clearly: the Striga story and the Last Wish. In the Striga story, he could have chosen any number of options that would have been easier, but he actively went against Foltest's wishes to save the princess. In The Last Wish, he chose to go looking for a djinn, something he knew better than to attempt. It was a dumb decision, but it was actively made. He did not just deal passively with Jaskier's coincidental find. And those conscious decisions tell us something about a character, certainly more than if he's just rolling with the punches. It wouldn't have made him a strong protagonist if we see him permanently victimized by destiny instead of watching him actively trying to shape it. Especially since with Yennefer being as awesome as she is in the show, living her life to her own standards, Geralt had to be her equal in this. No strong side characters. One of the major flaws of a Mary Sue-like character is that the whole story gravitates around it, creating what OSP called a Sue singularity. This isn't a negative character trait of the protagonist. It is a writing problem that especially leads to the story or movie having no memorable side characters aside, maybe, from the villain. While the book suffers from this not as much as most 80s action movies, it cannot be denied that the whole narrative revolves solely around Geralt. Everyone is forever needing his help, and he is always present when something momentous occurs in the continent's history. He, who we are meant to believe is a lowly and generally despised witcher, comes to be on pretty personal terms with about every influential person or ruler on the continent. Now, that last point is something the show cannot change without fundamentally changing what the books have been about, but they can and did course correct on the way he is presented as being always at the center of things and other characters, including Ciri and Yennefer, only being there to further his story. Therefore, it was crucial to craft characters with as much potential as we see in the series. People with a rich backstory, relatable motives, and their own agenda. I might dive a bit deeper into how I love the way the other characters are written later. For the purpose of this point, let's just say it serves Geralt well to have been written as the kind of character who would not be the sole focus of the narrative. He can instead share the spotlight while still holding his own. It makes him more believable as the outcast and underdog. In addition, it gives the relationships he develops to either of the characters more depth and more potential for believable conflict, resulting in emotionally satisfying resolutions and character development. Unfit partner and parent. The action hero's promiscuity and emotional dysfunction leaves no room for a truly meaningful and deep relationship to a capable female character. Geralt's relationships to women are something that merits its own point later on, but let me just point out here that the way he is portrayed in the books in regards to women is self-defeating, hurts his characterization and motivation, and makes his attachment to Yennefer seem contrived, arbitrary and unrealistic. In addition, the action heroes and book Geralt's lack of being able to take care even of himself and his often emphasized unwillingness to be responsible for someone else disqualifies him to take care of a more vulnerable person like, let's say, a child. While Geralt in the show starts out that way, we come to see it as a front, a carefully constructed self-deceit, because first Jaskier and later villain Trettenmirth have no problem seeing through it and recognize what he truly craves. And we don't see him disagreeing with either of them.
And yet, here we are.
In conclusion, Geralt has been an enjoyable character to both read about and play in the games, even if we can attest him a closeness to the archetype of the 80s action movie star, a sort of male Mary Sue. As a character in the adaptation of the source material, he needed to have a few additional traits and lose others, not only to make him appeal to a more diverse and modern audience, but to give the character the possibility to develop, to go through a character arc. Show Geralt's journey will still be enjoyable and relevant long after the 80s action hero has gone the way of the dinosaurs.